I see culture as one of those rather slippery, abstract entities. It's something that is embedded in all of us, and it becomes very difficult for us to extrapolate ourselves from it. It becomes a part of us, or do we become a part of it? The title of this video might seem a little extreme, but I do believe that culture does still have the ability to shock us. Even if we may have seen a YouTube video about it, we may have read about it somewhere, that's still not quite the same as being confronted by or being immersed in the culture in question. And seeing as I'm back in the UK for a while, I thought it would be fun to share some of the thoughts I have on this matter. There do exist many concrete differences between these two countries, the language for one thing, or driving on different sides of the road, or the healthcare system, education system, but these are rather quantifiable, easily sort of understood concepts, and I am more interested in the slippery, abstract, cultural side of things, which you only really fully understand once you have immersed yourself in the cultures of both countries for an extended period of time. Now, as always, these are just my experiences and my opinions. I'm very well aware that Scotland is not quite the same as England, and that, there are differences between Bavaria and Schleswig-Holstein. There's not necessarily any right or wrong here. And come on, this is just a bit of fun. I find it fun to think about and talk about these cultural differences. If you disagree with me, make sure to say why in the comments below. So, without further ado, self-expression. Okay, one thing which really stood out to me during my time here in the UK is this real deep desire, or even I would call it a strong need for creative self-expression. And granted, I have spent quite a bit of time in Brighton, which is a little special in this regard. Brighton is a little more progressive and more out there than other cities in the UK, but I have seen this even in Manchester, Liverpool, Cardiff, Edinburgh, many other places in the UK. There does seem to be really a creative need or this desire to stand out, to be somehow different, and whether that means dyeing your hair blue, or covering yourself in tattoos, or taking your guitar with you everywhere you go. This is definitely something that I have not really seen in Germany, and this can be quite shocking if you're not used to it. And there is really a definite desire to express what's going on inside, to be different somehow. And this is visible in a very visceral and visual sense, and whether it's the intended purpose or not, I did kind of get the feeling that there was some sort of anti-conformist mentality built up in all of this. Maybe it's a sort of a reaction against having to wear a school uniform, but who knows? Whatever it is, I've not seen this in Germany other than really in Berlin, but as we know, Berlin is a little bit special. There is a pretty wide spectrum of tolerance for what is considered socially acceptable in the UK, whether it's strumming your guitar at 10 p.m. in the park, or it's facial piercings, or sort of weird and wacky hairstyles. The individual does have quite a bit of space to breathe in the UK. And I have talked about individualism as opposed to conformism before, and it is a real thing, especially when talking about the physical manifestations of the individual. When it comes to the world of work and what you actually do with your life, the rules of society are more fluid and less clear in the UK. There's not one specific path to follow, but really a multitude of options. I sometimes get the feeling that people are just winging it more in the UK. They're just trying something out and seeing what happens. Things are more rigid in Germany, but they're also more clear, and there is definitely a greater sense of security and sort of knowing, which step, which path to follow. There is a process. Now, this next culture shock, if you want to call it that, I think really is a great example of how the Germans and the Brits really see the same behavior in very different ways. And you could call it empathy, you could call it looking out for each other, you could call it fake friendliness. But this culture of something nice in the UK is something that I had forgotten about, and something which did surprise me when being back here. And, it shows up in very small, little minute ways. It's when the waitress calls you darling or lovely. Or it's the slightly cheesy but adorable signs in coffee shops, telling us that everything will be okay, or that today's rain is tomorrow's whiskey. Or it's these incessant street signs coddling us to be careful, like please hold the handrail, or please mind the gap, or, be careful when crossing the road, look right, left, right, and right again before crossing the road. Sometimes I'm thinking like, this is a little too much, it's like, why the hell should I hold the handrail? Do I really look that frail? But Germans and other people have told me that it makes them feel very cared for and looked after, especially when they're in that foreign city and don't know the way around. Having these signs sort of it makes them feel nice. It sort of gives you a warm feeling that somebody is looking out for you, that you're being guided through the city. It's what I call adding a little bit of flavor to life, a little bit of spice. The spice must flow, and it is important. Those little sort of encounters with strangers, I think, are important. And this is something that will very rarely happen in Germany. Mainly because, if this doesn't really seem to serve a purpose, you don't usually talk to somebody unless you have a reason, or unless the situation sort of encourages you to speak to them. But not just that, it does often come across as being fake, this over-friendliness. Why would you be so friendly to a stranger, to somebody you don't know? You have no reason to be friendly with them. It makes the Germans suspicious. And I get it, I do get it, because the Brits also have a similar view of the Americans. We often find the Americans to be a little, too over the top, overtly friendly, and it comes across as fake to the Brits. So I do understand this point of view, and it's really sort of a balancing act. It's an act of degrees. But my reaction, my reverse culture shock, if you will, to this sort of topic of small talk really showed me how Germanized I've become. And speaking of being Germanized, I was very aware that nobody was staring at me on the street, and I made another video about the German stare. And in that video, I mentioned that I didn't really notice the German stare when I moved to Germany, because I moved to Germany from China, which was a whole, different level of degrees. But I really was aware, I was really looking out for it when being back in the UK. And it's a thing. It's definitely, the German stare is definitely a thing. And I found myself trying to make eye contact, trying to look at people here on the street. Nobody seemed to notice that I was looking at them, and nobody looked at me. And it might seem like I'm just contradicting the previous point I made, but it's really all about timing. British people will look at you. They will look you in the eye. They will make eye contact when you are transacting, whether you're in the shop, and the restaurant, at the till, and the supermarket, maybe on public transport. But walking down the street in a big city, I'm talking about cities here, by the way. Obviously, in the countryside, it's very different. In the countryside, in small towns, you will greet everyone you meet, because you might only meet 5 people within any given day. But in a big city, walking through the street, down the street, in London, Manchester, Newcastle, Brighton, wherever it is, you will not be making eye contact. You will not be looking, you will not be staring at people on the street. And this is very different in the German cities that I know. And I actually have to admit that I miss it a little bit. I was asking myself the question, like, why is nobody looking at me? Do I look that nondescript? Do I look somehow threatening? What is going on? The geography of the two countries, I think, really is very different and very important. They are both highly densely populated countries with rural areas as well. But I think the fact that the UK is an island has often been cited as one of the reasons why the people here do not feel very closely connected to Europe in the way that Germans do. In the UK, we talk about the continent all the time. I've never even heard this phrase being used in Germany. But the continent really seems like a faraway, foreign land, and it's definitely something which is very separate to the UK, just because of this geographical element. And I did already mention this in a previous video, but I was actually quite shocked by the prevalence of the Union Jack and sort of the self-promotion going on in the UK. Now, I think this has always been the case to some degree, but I do have the feeling that it's intensified in the last few years. And I already talked about the food labeling in a previous video. And I think if you're from the UK, this will just really seem like normal. You won't notice this. But I was really shocked at the prevalence of the Union Jack everywhere. In most supermarkets on food labeling, there are so many slogans about supporting British farmers, British beef, British milk, British grown vegetables, apples, whatever. It's very, very, very clear. And, it's really marketed everywhere. in Tesco, Aldi, Morrison's, Waitrose. Really, all the supermarkets are doing this. And I do get the feeling that this is kind of, a reason to buy. Whereas in Germany, organic Demeter is kind of a reason to buy the produce. In this sense, this is the reason to buy it. Now, it's not more expensive necessarily than anything else, but there is a definite sense of supporting your locals, supporting, the country and your brothers and sisters in a way. And, this spills over also into music, supporting your sort of homegrown musical talent and actors and British theatre and film and all that kind of stuff. And it really boils down to pride, to national pride, and really supporting the nation's interests. Pride in one's country is treated obviously very differently in Germany and in the UK. First of all, I think really it's probably just the English that identify as British or, from the UK. Most people from Scotland or Wales or Ireland, they will identify as, being from those countries and not necessarily from the UK. German pride is a huge topic and really, one for another separate video. But in short, given the country's history, being proud to be German is just not a thing. If you were to say, I love Germany as a German, this really is taboo, and it will get you a lot of weird looks, a lot of raised eyebrows. It's just not something which you can do. And so because of this, most Germans will say that they identify with their hometown or their home, the place of birth, the city that they live in, like a regional pride. Given Germany's central location within Europe and its proximity to so many other countries and cultures, it definitely does feel a lot more connected, and it feels like it is part of something bigger, in a sense. And I think it's no surprise that the majority of Germans will also identify as Europeans as well as Germans, whereas in the UK, it's really a small minority who would identify as Europeans. There are no winners and losers when it comes to culture. There are trade-offs, preferences, likes and dislikes. The moment you feel attacked or defensive when somebody comments on a certain culture is the moment you realize where your loyalties lie. What have your experiences been? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.